As they neared the living room, David and the others suddenly arrived at the door, their faces showing shock and disbelief as they looked at the three of them, all stunned while exchanging glances. Chanty was startled by the sudden arrival of David, Marco, Jacob, and Jake, while Gabriel remained in the living room, standing alert and watching for any possible events. David's face showed concern but alertness, ready for whatever potential confrontation might occur. Jacob and Jake also displayed worry as they looked at her. "It's Vasper. I sense his presence here in the house," David said with a concerned tone, looking at the three of them heading towards the living room. Indeed, Vasper had not been gone for long. He approached Chanty and Sir Lewis, and the listeners widened their eyes, showing surprise and concern. "David, Vasper has infiltrated our house. They shouldn't be able to enter here, right?" Marco asked, questioning. Everyone gathered in the living room, but Chanty remained seated while the seven of them stood, and David, restless, with a troubled expression, his movements betraying his unease. He looked at his companions, they exchanged glances, seemingly communicating without words. Jacob's gaze did not leave Chanty, while she remained stunned by the events. Jake could not contain himself. "David, I'll take Chanty to my house, to my mansion. There will be no one else there. Who will come with me? Because if they attack tomorrow, you will face them. I will only take Chanty to my house. I will return here, but someone needs to watch over her there," Jake added. David faced him. "Jake, that's better. I need Jacob here, Gabriel, Lewis, and you, Jake, for the fight if Leica comes," David added. When Chanty heard Leica's name, she seemed to snap out of her daze. She looked at the men talking in front of her. Her emotions mixed, fear and concern for David and the others. "Justin, Marco, it's better if you accompany Chanty to Jake's house. But Lorena and our companions here, let's send them far from here to the city now. Lewis, you will escort Samuel to the city, and Jake, prepare your things," David said quickly, looking at Justin, Marco, and Jake. He approached Chanty. "Chanty, this is the plan. Go with Jake to his house, so you won't be followed by Leica. Justin and Marco will go with you, but not Lorena," David said, facing Chanty, holding her hand, his eyes full of compassion and concern as he looked at her. David felt Chanty's hands and knees trembling. Chanty didn't say anything, but her expression showed fear and concern. David took a deep breath as he looked at Chanty. The men around her, especially Jacob, also wondered, "What did Vasper do to you? Did he talk to you?" David's voice was low but clear. The men around waited for his response. Chanty shared the story Vasper had told her, but she omitted the part about Vasper kissing her and revealing her past, starting from the recent battle between Jacob, Gabriel, Marco, and Justin. Until when David arrived, she was taken aback, realizing they would soon discover what Vasper had done to her. She felt ashamed and wondered why she couldn't stop Vasper's actions, why her feelings were different. However, Jacob, who never took his eyes off her, seemed to read her reactions, and she couldn't bring herself to confront Jacob. Was she feeling guilty? She remained silent after Vasper's story in front of David. "I believe Vasper is still around, observing us," Lewis said. "We shouldn't trust him." Marco also added, "Don't delay, let's act now." David instructed his companions, "Chanty, bring Don Lorenzo's jar. Once everything settles down, we can return it to its rightful place. But for now, we can't do that." David called for Samuel and discussed their tasks. Samuel quickly packed their belongings, while Lorena took care of Chanty's things to be brought to Jake's house. Chanty sat on her bed, tears streaming down her face as she watched Lorena pack her belongings. Lorena approached her and hugged her tightly. "Miss Chanty, be strong. You need to face the challenges ahead. Don't worry, David won't abandon you. I want to accompany you, but David won't allow it. I can't travel with you, and I can't go with you because my family will look for me. I'll be gone for only 2 weeks, I'll return immediately. But if Sir David changes his mind, I might visit you, Miss Chanty," Lorena added, full of concern for her. Lorena hoped to ease her feelings of sorrow and worry about the events. She quieted her tears. Lorena continued her work of packing, but Chanty's emotions were in turmoil. She was confused, her mind in a battle of conflicting thoughts. She couldn't forget Vasper's warning about Leica. Why was he warning her about his sister? Was Vasper just playing with them? What was Vasper's game? Was it part of Vasper's game to oppose David? Why? Why did Vasper warn her? To protect her? A humorous reason, the most impossible reason of all. Vasper had a plan, that's what she thought. Unless Vasper wanted to deceive her for his own interests against his own family? Was that Vasper's plan? To be selfish and desire immortality more than his father? Chanty couldn't believe it, thinking to herself. But there was another reason that lingered in her mind, one she couldn't understand. She felt betrayed by her own feelings. After Lorena finished packing her belongings, Lorena meticulously took each suitcase outside the room, leaving Chanty alone. Despite the brief respite she had experienced in David's home, a sense of longing for the room enveloped her, akin to the solitude she felt in her own abode. Retrieving the jar containing her father's ashes from the table, she placed it in a black bag for safekeeping. She returned to sit on the bed, sinking into deep contemplation. Moments later, she stood up and exited her room. As she stepped out, she was surprised to find Jacob standing before her. His expression was serious, his gaze fixed on her, leaving her unsure whether he was contemplating something or showing compassion. Startled by Jacob's sudden appearance, she wondered if he had been waiting for her all along. "Jacob, were you waiting here earlier?" she asked, her voice tinged with embarrassment and concern as she met Jacob's gaze. "I just wanted to speak with you briefly." "Take care, Chanty. Justin and Marco won't leave you alone. Once we finish here we will visit you," Jacob replied in a soft voice that only she could hear. "Thank you, Jacob. Please take care here, especially with the Mondragons." "I can't offer any help for this event," Chanty responded, her voice filled with worry and fear as she conversed with Jacob. "Are you ready, Chanty?" Jake suddenly interjected into their conversation, standing up but leaning against an angel sculpture not far from where Jacob stood. Jake's gaze was serious as he looked at both Jacob and Chanty. He noticed Jacob's unease and was not expecting Jake to join in abruptly. Jake approached them, but Jacob's eyes remained fixed. A silent exchange occurred between Jacob and Jake. Jake then turned to Chanty. "We're just waiting for you. David said we'll have dinner together." "Let's all go," Jake suggested, but Jacob seemed to understand Jake's unspoken thoughts. Suddenly, the three fell silent, unable to comprehend what had caused the tension between Jake and Jacob. However, they noticed Samuel signaling from the front that the dining table was ready. Jake and Jacob ceased their silent communication. Chanty slowly placed the black bag containing the jar atop her suitcase before she made her way towards the dining room, followed by Jake and Jacob behind her. David, Marco, Justin, Gabriel, and Louis were already waiting, observing as they approached the table. Justin and Gabriel had different focuses. Gabriel's attention was on Jacob, while Justin's was on Jake. David waited for everyone to be seated before initiating a brief prayer of gratitude, followed by the start of the meal. As they ate, David took charge, providing instructions on tasks for Justin, Marco, and the others, resembling a father figure. David exuded a sense of responsibility and leadership among their group of 7. Chanty listened attentively to David's reminders, while Jacob and Gabriel engaged in a silent exchange, as did Justin and Jake. Chanty couldn't quite grasp the atmosphere surrounding them. After eating, David had Lorena, Laura, and the assistant cook, and Samuel, brought to the city to one of David's houses by Louis. Chanty felt sad because she was far from Lorena, who was an excellent assistant for her, but she couldn't do anything because David's orders had to be followed. For the well-being of Lorena and David's staffs, they decided to separate from them due to the chaos brought by Vasper Mondragon's family, especially his sister Leica Mondragon. Marco, Justin, and Jake were ready to leave David's house. Jake planned to use teleportation for their journey. Her mind was already accustomed to the idea of teleportation, just like the feeling she had when she arrived at David's house. This was the only way to avoid being traced by Leica and to leave quickly that night. They gathered in the middle of the living room after Louis and David's helpers left. "David," should we believe Vasper's stories? Gabriel asked, looking seriously at David. They all fell silent. It's better to be prepared in case Leica shows up here, as Vasper has already proven he knows our location. It's not impossible for Leica to appear at any time, David replied seriously. They all fell silent, with only Gabriel's sighs breaking the silence. Jake, take care of Chanty, David instructed Jake, while reminding Justin and Marco to focus seriously. His siblings just nodded in response to their brother's reminder. Justin and Marco each carried their belongings, including Chanty's suitcases, but Chanty only held the black bag, waiting for the signal from Jake. While Jacob's face betrayed the sorrow of Chanty's departure, he stubbornly masked his emotions. Only Gabriel knows what he's going through. We're ready, David, Jake declared as he took Chanty's hand, while Marco and Justin drawing near and hold his shoulder, prompting David to nod approvingly at Jake and his siblings, signaling that they were now free to leave. Gabriel and Jake followed suit. Lastly, Jake glanced at Jacob before they vanished, leaving the three of them. Chanty, Marco, Justin, and Jake and all their belongings in front of them now gone. The three remaining in the room fell into a temporary silence, overshadowed by the absence of the four who had departed, especially Jacob, seemingly lost in a haze of emotions he struggled to comprehend. Let's wait for Lewis and Jake's return. We'll plan our next move for tomorrow. We can't be sure when Leica might strike. We must always be prepared, David spoke earnestly, addressing Jacob directly. Jacob and Gabriel listened intently, nodding in agreement as David shared his thoughts. In David's mind, he yearned for an end to the long-standing feud with Leica. It was also time for him to confront the loss of his mother and Chanty's parents. David clenched his fists, no longer willing to delay the inevitable confrontation with his adversary, mere hours away. His teeth gritted at the thought of Leica. Despite her being a woman, her combat prowess was not to be underestimated, for her power was formidable. As Gabriel suddenly stood up and ran out of David's house like lightning, David and Jacob were surprised by Gabriel's actions. They understood what Gabriel was showing through his reaction. They followed Gabriel, and when they stepped out of the house, they were faced with a horde of creatures, with faces like zombies, but their movements were swift as they circled around the lampost's boundary around David's property. Along with this, the horses broke free from their stables, relentlessly screaming and running wild. Even though some of them were caught by the enemies, others managed to escape. The three of them stood watching, as the creatures and Leica's henchmen were attacking the horses. This was what they had been waiting for. Leica. In the dead of night, Leica appeared. Amidst the many henchmen who stood, they saw various terrifying faces. In the middle, Leica stood. The most beautiful woman in a cowboy attire, smiling as she faced and stared at David. Behind her smile, the fierceness of her vengeance was evident. She was looking for Jake, but only David and his two friends was in front of her. They couldn't enter David's property, because of the invisible shield that could burn their skin. Even she couldn't enter past the lampost's boundary. She tried to break the invisible barrier, and tried to break it with her power. Her lightning-like fire emerged from her hands, following the invisible barrier that covered David's property. The sound of her power and the lightning fire could be heard all around. A few seconds passed, but the barrier remained unbroken. In her frustration, she shouted while staring painfully at David. She saw the anger in the eyes of the three men in front of her. Her eyes searched for Jake and Chanty. Where was the one she had been looking for? Where did David hide Chanty? Her gaze challenged the three men in front of her. Her smiles gave way to anger and resentment towards her opponents. David, are you just going to stand there? Won't you come out to greet me? Your guest, right? Is that how you treat your guest, David? Leica said, her voice sweet but sarcastic, infuriating to hear. She also saw Jacob with his strikingly handsome face and attractive stature as a man, but with intense look and deadly gaze towards her. She grinned and giggled. Jacob saw that, and suddenly, a swift lightning moved from Jacob's surprised Leica. Jacob and Leica faced each other, face to face. The background around them seemed to blur, due to the ongoing battle between her henchmen and David and Gabriel. The movements of Jacob and Leica seemed like slow motion. They both compete, who will get a grip first. As Jacob neared Leica's face, Leica could already smell Jacob's breath. But the force and agility of Leica's movements were unmatched. Like lightning attacking Jacob, she's attacking him with her fire, accompanied by shock wave. Jacob also countered with his blue fire, that had a water-like effect, extinguishing Leica's fire and pushing her back. Jacob and Leica's movements were almost imperceptible. Despite being a woman, Leica's combat skills were unmatched. She should not be underestimated. Jacob's only goal in his attack was to shoot a large blue fire at Leica's chest, knowing it was impossible for Leica to survive the impact of his attack, but he could hardly keep up with Leica. He couldn't afford to look away, for even a second, due to her speed in dodging and moving. Vasper and Leica had similar abilities, the only difference being that Vasper was stronger, but Leica's agility and movement was not to be taken lightly. Jacob saw Leica's henchmen retreating into the forest due to their defeat and attacking David and Gabriel. The trees all fell as they passed and were hit by Leica's fire. Along with Leica's fire attack, Jacob also counterattacked to prevent the surroundings from burning. David and Gabriel's shouts were heard by Jacob. As the intense battle raged on, David's super strength, Gabriel's incredible speed, and Jacob's combination of speed and strength were on full display. Jacob unleashed his blue fire attack, effectively extinguishing Leica's fiery assaults. Together, David and Gabriel fought fiercely, defeating Leica's minions one by one. Meanwhile, Jacob managed to inflict a wound on Leica's legs and her beautiful face, further enraging her. With intense look while touching her face and deadly gaze towards Jacob. In a surprising turn of events, fueled by her fury, Leica swiftly approached Jacob and embraced him, caught him in surprise, and Leica planting a kiss that seemed passionate and deep, like a lover's kiss, but was, in reality, deadly. The kiss carried a poison that swiftly weakened Jacob's body, leaving him vulnerable. He can't move, like he was paralyzed. Jacob was surprised by what Leica did. Suddenly hugging and kissing him on the lips is very least he could ever think of from his enemy. Even David was shocked by what they saw, but Gabriel knew what Leica was doing. Gabriel quickly approached Leica and Jacob, but he couldn't catch Leica. He couldn't grasp her because of the speed of her movements, even as she was hugging and carrying Jacob. However, Leica's hands knew where to attack Gabriel while she was kissing Jacob. The scent of Leica's breath and the softness of her lips were the last things Jacob thought of before he lost consciousness. He lost his strength and felt like a withered leaf, falling to the ground after Leica released him. Leica grinned, looking at Jacob, who had fallen to the ground, a grin of victory, while she glanced at David, who was in shock watching the event. Suddenly, Leica was thrown far away, due to the impact of Gabriel's attack. Like lightning, Gabriel took Jacob's body without hesitation and brought him to David. David quickly caught Jacob and hurried back to his house to treat and rescue Jacob as much as he could. Gabriel and Leica were left facing each other, alone. In the middle of the forest, in the middle of the night, but the surroundings were very bright, in the view of these two, whose gazes were locked on each other. Gabriel saw from the corner of his eye the bodies of Leica's henchmen melting away like candles. Leica grinned at Gabriel with a sardonic smile. But her eyes were full of courage. Gabriel, tell Jacob later that he has the sweetest lips I've ever kissed and tasted. Leica whispering into Gabriel's ear, with a grin. That is if he ever wakes up, she added, maintaining the sardonic smile on her lips. Gabriel's anger was immeasurable, and he suddenly attacked Leica with the shockwave of his fists, but she quickly dodged. Where is Chanty, Gabriel? Leica shouted. Because I will give the antidote for Jacob to recover, she added, while they grappled in the forest. She showed Gabriel a small vial with red liquid inside. Just one drop of this will revive your friend. If he isn't treated now, he won't wake up tomorrow, Leica said while laughing. Gabriel's anger intensified upon hearing this. He shouted while attacking Leica. Leica's fire spread through the forest, as Gabriel had no ability to stop Leica's fiery attack. Gabriel's anger intensified, and he tried even harder to snatch the vial of poison, antidote from Leica's hands. Despite the wounds on Leica's face and legs, she seemed unaffected and taunted. Gabriel, you are just a human, weak, and will get tired. How long can you keep up with my movements? Leica said this teasingly yet insultingly. What chance does Gabriel have if his opponent is not human like him? Leica's loud laughter echoed through the woods. Suddenly, she stopped not far away, facing him with a serious and deadly look. The beauty of the woman in front of him contrasted with her true abilities and nature. Gabriel trembled with rage, and in his mind, he had already planned to end their battle that night. "Choose, it's either this or Chanty," Leica said as she raised the vial. Her hair was on fire, but it was part of her power that prevented her from being affected by her own flames. "Just a few hours left, Gabriel." "Time is running out," Leica reminded him. In his anger, Gabriel swiftly approached Leica, making his fastest move to catch and hold the woman. Leica was surprised by Gabriel's movement, who had now grabbed her body. Gabriel hugged her tightly, intending to crush her with his own body. Leica couldn't move, trapped by Gabriel's arms, and she felt the power emanating from his body. She couldn't breathe or move, their faces so close she could almost breathe in Gabriel's breath. Gabriel looked at her, grinning, but his eyes were determined to end their fight. She couldn't believe that Gabriel could restrain her with his hug. Gabriel took the vial from her hands, but he struggled to hold it, even though she was already trapped in his arms. As Gabriel's power grew, so did his screams, a sign of his effort and release of power to crush Leica in his arms, until he finally took the vial from Leica's hands. Furious, Leica's hairfire spread over her entire body, accompanied by her loud scream, as she struggled to free herself from Gabriel's hug. But Gabriel endured the flames that engulfed them both, knowing only he was affected by her fire. Leica screamed and laughed loudly. However, Gabriel's strength weakened, affected by the fire consuming them both, burning his clothes. Even his hair, suddenly loosening his hug, and Leica threw him far away, and followed up with a fiery attack. Gabriel flew far, on fire, and rolled down the hillside, toward a small stream. But he never let go of the vial he had snatched from Leica. Leica followed him to where he had fallen, her face and eyes filled with anger and rage. She was about to throw another fire attack at Gabriel, while he rolled and crawled to stand up, but someone counterattacked her attack. It was Louis, standing not far away, and the fallen trees and rocks flew towards Leica, controlled by Louis's power to manipulate objects around him. Leica dodged Louis's attacks, their surroundings ablaze, looking from afar like a forest fire, except the fire flew with the shockwave from Leica's power. Louis relentlessly attacked while approaching Gabriel, his eyes not leaving Leica. "Go home, Gabriel." "I'll handle this," Louis told the weakened Gabriel, crawling in the underbrush, by the stream, shirtless and with large burns on his body, severely affected by Leica's fire. But he still had enough strength to stand. He listened to Louis while watching the relentless counterattack of Leica's attacks by Louis. They heard Leica scream Gabriel's name, wanting to snatch back the vial,